that this presentation was elaborated by the 14 members of the Brazilian civil society delegates. To initiate it, we would like to explain what the Global Attitude Institute is and does. It is a non-governmental, not-for-profit organization that fosters international cooperation by inspiring and empowering transformative processes both in Brazil and abroad. The Institute strives to design and coordinate innovative projects by engaging individuals and communities in matters that are important and relevant to our society. In 2018, the Institute was accredited by the ECOSOC with consultative status, and since then it's been able to participate on the Commission on the Status of Women. Before we start, we would like to evoke the memory of a human rights defender and Rio de Janeiro Councilwoman Marielle Franco. Marielle was murdered alongside her driver Anderson Gomez on the night of March 14, 2018. Marielle was a councilwoman in the city of Rio de Janeiro, a black woman, a feminist, a member of the LGBTQ community, a sociologist, and a human rights defender. And for speaking out against the dramatic scenario black people genocide, black people suffered in the favelas in Rio de Janeiro after the military occupation. Marielle represented a serious threat to a very dangerous status quo ruined by the militias in the city. Her political assassination 1 year later still remains unsolved, and no one was held accountable for that. At this particular moment, we would also like to express our solidarity with the communities affected by the collapse of the mining tailing dam in the town of Brumadinho in the state of Minas Gerais. The dam that was operated by the Brazilian company Vale contained 11.7 billion cubic meters of iron ore waste. After its rupture, 186 people were pronounced dead. 122 people were declared missing, and 138 people were left homeless. Countless animals were killed, and the Paraopeba River was contaminated with heavy chemicals that killed thousands of animals. Also, the water supply of 48 riverside districts was damaged because of the collapse. The total extent of the damages supported by affected the families and the natural environment and remains still unmeasurable. And the women in the town of Brumadinho had to bury their children, their husbands, nephews, and family members who were working on the dam at the time of the collapse. They are housewives, farmers, fisherwomen who have lost not only their families but also their source of subsistence. And today they have to deal with the mud, with violence, and the death of their loved ones. Beyond presenting our position as Brazilian civil society representatives, our main goal with today's presentation is to provide a broad panorama of the current status of the Brazilian women. Civil society, as you know, is the one that demands the implementation of gender-sensitive public policies and monitors the effectiveness and safety of support institutions for women and fosters gender equality in Brazil. Today, we'll be talking about the following topics: gender-based and domestic violence, sexual and reproductive rights, economic inequality, underrepresentation in politics, and the role of civil society organizations in our country. Thank you.
So we're going to start this discussion by talking about gender-based violence and domestic violence. We understand gender-based violence as a social problem that has a structural nature, which produces impacts in terms of public health, and it's also considered a serious violation of the human rights. If we look back, we can see that in Brazil, the feminist theories and the gender studies had a really important role in the process of pointing out the public and collective dimension of this phenomena. Because we need to understand that Brazilian culture is deeply influenced by the sexism, the structural sexism, and also by the Christian values. So for a really long time, we used to see domestic violence, our society used to see domestic violence as something that the state shouldn't get involved, something that shouldn't leave the private sphere. So it was really important that these movements helped us to undo the social invisibility of this issue, and then they made it possible for us to demand from the state a greater involvement in the care and protection of women in situations of violence. So in 2006, the fight against gender-based violence was reinforced in Brazil by the promulgation of the Maria da Penha law. This is a law that aims to create mechanisms to prevent the situations of violence, to punish those who inflict violence against women by applying more severe penalties than we used to have before, and also to protect women in situations of violence. This is a law that does not rely on social markers such as class, race, income, but what about transgender women? Well, they are not quoted in the law, and although we have some judges and scholars that already understand that transgender women should be protected by Maria da Penha, for the majority, this is a law that only protects cisgender women. And this is an issue that we hope we can change in the next few years. But besides that, I think it's important to know that we consider Maria da Penha a milestone in the fight against gender-based violence, because it leads public institutions to invest in an efficient network of coping with this violence, which is something that we didn't have before. I think it's nice to say that for this law, it doesn't consider violence against women as just physical harm. It's also about psychological violence, moral violence, patrimonial violence, and sexual violence as well. So, despite the clear progress made by the changes instituted by this law, I think it's safe to say that our scenario in Brazil remains really alarming. So we brought a few numbers and data just to show you a little bit of what's going on in our country. So in 2018, 1 in 4 women suffered from some form of violence. It is estimated that 12 women are killed violently every single day in our country, with half of these deaths involving domestic violence. Brazil is considered the 5th more dangerous country to be a woman, in a total of 83 countries. And it is estimated that every 2 minutes, 5 women are beaten, and every 11 minutes, a woman is raped. Also, women are more likely to suffer from physical harm in their own household. And in 76% of the cases of crimes perpetrated against women, they are perpetrated by someone close to the victim, and in 39% by partners or former partners of these victims. So what these numbers show us is that not only women are not safe in Brazil, but also that the least safe place for them to be is in their own home. When we are discussing gender-based violence, I think it's also important to bring it up the discussion about femicides. In Brazil, we understand a femicide as the murder of a woman for reasons associated with her gender. And it was established as a criminal type in the Brazilian Penal Code of 2015. So it's a really recent change that we had in Brazil. And what are the numbers of femicides since then? Well, a report showed us that in 2016, 4,000 women died in Brazil as a result of physical aggression. And of these 4,000 women, 60% were victims of femicide. Also, in only the first 20 days of this year, not even the first month, just the first 20 days of 2019, we have reported 107 cases of femicide. And in most of these cases, the scenario was really similar, committed by the partner or former partner of the victim, inside the house and with the use of a gun. Well, when we're discussing gender inequality-related matters, I think it's always important that we think about race as well. In Brazil, we can see that the femicide rates are 71% higher among black women when we compare to other women. And from 2003 to 2013, we could see that the femicide rates among white women has dropped in almost 10%. And what about black women? Well, among black women, it has increased in 56%. Besides this scenario, only a few states have signed the Latin American Protocol of Investigation of Violent Deaths by Gender. This is a protocol that provides good practices on the solution, investigation, and also prevention of these cases. And I think it's also important to say that the scenario that's already bad in our country only tends to get worse with the projects of making arms possession more flexible. Because if we consider that in almost half of the cases, women are killed with the use of a gun, I think it's safe to assume that by making guns possession more flexible, we are also increasing the vulnerability of women to suffer from a femicide in our country. When we bring this discussion to women with disabilities, the scenario gets even more shocking. 40% to 68% of the women with disabilities will experience sexual violence before the age of 18 in Brazil. So, besides this huge number, we don't think that this matter gets the attention that it deserves in our country. I don't think that we discuss as much as we need to what it's like to be a woman with a disability in a country like Brazil. But I guess that what we're trying to say is that to be a woman with a disability in our country, it's also to carry on another social marker of inequality as well.
Well, if we extend this discussion to other aspects of women's lives in Brazil, such as their access to sexual and reproductive rights, we can see that this dreadful scenario does not improve much. Regarding the right to abortion, for instance, Brazilian women still do not have any autonomy whatsoever to decide whether or not they will proceed with the gestation. It is hard to even publicly discuss the matter in Brazil once the procedure is considered a crime, and it's really difficult to find any reliable information about it. The Brazilian government has reported to the UN that clandestine and unsafe abortion is the 5th largest cause of maternal death in the country, which makes abortion one of Brazil's major public health issues. Besides that, the government has no official information on the number of illegal abortions carried out in the country every year. In Brazil, there are only 3 situations in which women are legally allowed to terminate pregnancy, which are the following. First comes rape-related pregnancy. Second, when the mother's life is at severe risk. And third is in the case of an anencephalic fetus. Despite the existence of these 3 exceptions in the law, they are frequently not respected, and women's rights to legal abortion are very limited and sometimes even denied. The available public service of legal abortion is very insufficient for the ever-growing demand, and doctors in public hospitals continually refuse to conduct their interventions based on their morals and on their religious beliefs. In addition to that, conservative politicians in the Congress have been repeatedly trying to modify the law in order to make it even more rigid and prohibited. In 2017, one of the most common procedures performed by SUS, which is Brazilian's public health systems, were the curettage, a procedure that aims to remove the tissue remains of an abortion from a woman's uterus to avoid infections and excessive bleeding. So 177,464 curetages were registered only in 2017, and this number represents 3.9% of all surgeries performed in the public health system in the same year. According to the National Survey on Abortion made by the NGO ANIS Institute of Bioethics, 1 in 5 Brazilian women will have had at least 1 abortion by the age of 40. This research interviewed about 2,000 women aged between 18 and 39 years old and estimated that in 2015, more than 416,000 abortions were carried out in Brazil. It was also found that the highest rates of abortions happen among low-educated, Black, brown, and indigenous women living in the north, northeastern, and midwestern regions of the country. Because of the criminalization of abortion and the consequent lack of effective public policies which are gender-sensitive, to address the issue in an integral and responsible way, approximately half of the women who had abortions had to be admitted in the public health system to complete the procedures or to deal with health complications caused by unsafe abortion. On the 8th of March of 2017, the Freedom and Socialist Party, PSOL, in partnership with the NGO ANIS that we mentioned before, filed a constitutional case before the Brazilian Supreme Court, requesting the decriminalization of abortion within the first trimester of pregnancy, based on the data collected by the National Survey on Abortion of 2016. The petition asks and questions Articles 124 and 126 of the Brazilian Penal Code, which criminalize abortion, claiming that the voluntary interruption of pregnancy during the first 12 weeks of gestation should be excluded from the scope of incidence of those 2 articles, based on the breach of several fundamental principles and rights guaranteed in Brazil's constitution, such as the fundamental principles of the dignity of the human race, the citizenship, non-discrimination based on sex, gender equality, and the fundamental rights to the inviolability of life, liberty, equality, the prohibition of torture, inhuman or degrading treatment, health, and family planning. The party also claimed that the criminalization of abortion violates sexual and reproductive rights, which can be derived from the constitutional rights to equality and freedom, and are also guaranteed in several international instruments for the protection of human rights, to which Brazil is a signatory member, We can mention the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, the Program of Action of the International Conference on Population and Development of Cairo, the Declaration and Platform for Action of the Fourth World Conference on Women of Beijing, the Montevideo Consensus on Population and Development, and also general recommendations and observations from the CEDAW Committee and the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Since the filing of this lawsuit, it has become one of the most controversial cases of Brazil's Supreme Court, reaching the record number of more than 50 requests from civil society organizations to participate in the trial as amicus curiae, and also more than 40 specialists admitted as speakers in public hearings, judicial public hearings. It is important to emphasize that criminalizing abortion impacts all women without discrimination, or more remarkably, those who are among the most socially vulnerable groups, such as poor, black women with low education levels and young women with less access to information. It must be taken into account that the access to sexual and reproductive rights is fundamental to achieve gender equality, and therefore the decriminalization of abortion is not only a public health issue, but also a powerful gender equality booster. The state's recognition of the right to legal and safe abortion is also a milestone in the process of deepening democracy and achieving gender equality, being also a determinant condition for the recognition of women as fully capable citizens, while allowing them to freely exercise their reproductive autonomy by respecting their life projects and plans. To summarize, women must have control of their own bodies so that they can achieve dignity, health, and equality.
In the economic field, violence against women is also revealed by the explicit gender pay gap and also by unequal opportunities at the workplace. The female population constantly appears with unfavorable statistics compared to their male counterparts, and this reveals the greater economic insecurity and the vulnerability of women to the risks inherent to the modern-day society. But actually, our women are minority. We are a minority in terms of our social disadvantages, but actually, in terms of population, we are a majority. We actually represent more than 75% of the economically active population. Although the numbers and the situation seem to favor a greater female representation in the job market, women are still haunted by unemployment. Women unemployment reached the two-digit mark, representing 11.8% of the economically active female population, compared to only 8% to the male population. In the last decade, Brazil has been struggling with a really serious crisis, and nowadays we're struggling with a really serious recession. And this data, which is from 2015, shows us that in times of need, in harsh times, the female population is the one who is going to not have jobs. So women are more likely to lose their jobs than men. Gender-based inequalities are also found in terms of access to quality jobs and the guarantee of labor rights. 54.3% of the female labor force is engaged in informal work, which means that more than half of all women who work in Brazil in 2015 performed their work without a formal contract, without medical coverage, and without social security. Regarding salary rates, in 2015, women received only 72.7% of the salary paid to men, even though they perform the same jobs and the same functions. And even though Brazil ratified the ILO's Convention number 100, who states that women and men who have the same functions should be paid an equal salary. And this convention is from 1950. So, in informal work, women even received 18% less than the minimum wage fixed at the time, which shows the huge economic insecurity in which most of the female population participates in the Brazilian labor market.
And subject to abuses. Over 90% of domestic helpers in Brazil are female. Black women represent more than 60% among them. After intense debates, the Constitutional Amendment number 72 was approved in 2012, opposed especially by the middle class, and established rights for domestic workers. Minimum wage, paid vacation days, and maximum working hours per week were remarkable achievements. Unfortunately, the domestic worker situation in Brazil is not appropriate. Sexual harassment and other gender-related abuses remain common. The Maria da Penha law, which protects women from physical, verbal, and sexual violence, considers domestic workers as subjects to protection against domestic violence. Thus, it contributes to transform racial and patriarchal arrangements within households. The status of female workers in Brazil can be changed and revolutionized simply by social policies, which can help the society to see and understand women as people who deserve care and attention. Many of the social policies we perceive in Brazil are related to equality between men and women in the workplace, such as equal payment, prohibition of discrimination, and especially equality of participation. However, equal participation does not necessarily mean that men and women would have equal competition. A greater incidence of men is perceived in professions with high prominence. But, on the other hand, women are more likely to end up with jobs who comprise a lower level of study in activities such as housekeeping, home caring, kindergarten, and so on. This disparity occurs in most parts because of the fact that most women are in charge of taking care of their children and their houses. Females are expected to be conformed to the domestic environment, while the male figure is the one who has an easier access to the labor market. Hence, it would be their social function to be the breadwinner. Since the Brazilian state omits its role in active labor market policies or economic policies, this can be understood as a form of economic violence. It takes constant efforts to provide women's access to quality jobs, education, and justice. Besides that, the economic scenario that has been built in Brazil with new liberal policies promises setbacks and an increase in the precariousness of women's lives in general. In response to the economic crisis in Brazil, the government has chosen to adopt fiscal austerity. The constitutional amendment that imposed a ceiling on public expenditures, the labor reform in 2017, as well as the chance of passing the pension reform in 2019, will certainly have negative impact on women's lives. Additionally, those measures represent attacks on the advances achieved through the Brazilian Constitution of 1988 towards the construction of a social welfare state in Brazil. It is noticeable that the female population have come a long and arduous way in search of a full acceptance of their condition, as well as of an equality towards men, especially in the labor market. With every century that passes, with every decade that is complete, and with every year of resistance, women gain more and more in society, a space that in reality was already theirs by right. However, these advances in terms of acquired rights are only in the sense of reducing the drastic difference between both genders, and not yet in the sense of effectively equalizing them.
Another issue regarding women's rights in Brazil is the lack of representative in politics. In 3 months in office, President Jair Bolsonaro, known as well as for his sexist statements and disregards for human rights, as he stated during his campaign that Brazil would leave the UN Human Rights Council once elected, his ministers have their actions based on conservative guidelines that hurt the economy and security of women and are opposed to the promotion of gender equality and the goals that make up the 50th Sustainable Development Goal. In addition to revealing the mindset of our current representatives, the advancement of conservative demands in the country has also fostered acts of racism, homophobia, misogyny, and abuse of power of the military police. We can notice setbacks in several political spheres. The current Minister of Women, Family, and Human Rights is a conservative woman who defends backward positions regarding women's rights. Just over a month ago, the Congressman Márcio Labre presented a bill pretending to prohibit the use of contraceptive methods under the justification that such a measure has the intention to protect women's health and defend life since conception. And unfortunately, he is not talking about women's lives. We believe that makes it clear that in a government, which representatives who issue those statements, the promotion of public policies for the prevention of STDs and the sexual rights of women is threatened, and our feeling is that we are going backwards. Not being enough, the Minister of Education, Ricardo Vélez Rodrigues, is sympathetic to the military dictatorship and works on a no-party school project, which foresees combating the dialogue about political left and right wings and promoting religious, patriotic, and family values in school. This brings threat to the promotion of sexual education, secularism, critical and free thinking at schools. If we cannot talk about such things in schools, how can we foster gender equality as a goal? And how can we protect women and girls? It also should be noted that the women's representation in the Congress in Brazil is minimal. Last week, the president manifested himself trying to point out as something positive the lack of female presence in his government. Only 77 of 513 members elected of the lower house are women. This represents that only 15% of the chamber deputies are women. And we can see that this is the best scenario based on the last years. In the Senate, 12 of the 54 seats are occupied by women. Today, only one of Brazil's 27 states have a female governor. Although gender issues are a social problem related to democracy, research indicated that once a legislator is male or female, there is a distinct impact on their policy priorities. There are also evidence showing that as more women are elected to office, there is an increase in policy making that emphasizes quality of life, especially on women's social security. Women's underrepresentation of the government harms the dialogue in way to develop and enforce gender equality policies. Gender equality in public life is essential to sustain strong democracies because it helps to point out social issues to get considered and to work for their possible solutions. With all that, female representativeness makes women more engaged in civic discussion, inspires leadership, and creates a favorable scenario to build a more equalitarian society.
Now we are going to show a video.
Eu era só uma criança, sabe? Sempre que ele chegava bêbado em casa, acontecia a mesma coisa.
Eu fazia esse caminho todos os dias para voltar para casa e ele devia saber disso.
Nunca imaginei passar por isso, não num ambiente de trabalho. E foi aí que eu percebi que tinham colocado alguma coisa na minha bebida.
Eu me senti culpada, fiquei com vergonha, sei lá do quê. Eu nunca me senti tão sozinha. Eu cheguei a pensar em acabar com a minha própria vida.
Essas histórias são todas reais. A cada 11 minutos, uma mulher é estuprada no Brasil.
Quase 500 mil de mulheres por ano.
E isso considerando que só 10% dos casos são notificados.
Passar por uma violência como essa é inaceitável.
Mais inaceitável ainda é saber que essas mulheres muitas vezes não têm a quem recorrer.
Em todo o país, existem pouquíssimos serviços especializados em oferecer apoio, suporte, orientação e justiça para essas mulheres.
Os serviços que existem nem sempre funcionam.
Um problema que se agrava a cada 11 minutos não pode esperar nem mais um segundo.
Olá, meu nome é Eva Luana, tenho 21 anos, moro em Camaçari, Bahia. Minha história ficou conhecida quando eu coloquei na internet os abusos sexuais que eu sofria na minha família. O meu abusador foi o meu padrasto. Isso se iniciou quando eu tinha 12 anos e perdurou até os 13 anos. Aos 13 anos, eu fui na delegacia e denunciei, não somente os abusos, mas também os maus tratos que aconteciam com a minha mãe. Ela era agredida, torturada, ela não tinha independência alguma. E ela tinha uma empresa, e nessa empresa ela tomava conta de tudo. E a partir do momento que ele entrou nas nossas vidas, perdemos tudo que tínhamos. Ele começou a controlar não somente o nosso dinheiro, mas também os nossos horários, a nossa vida, a nossa rotina. Então tudo ficou muito complicado. E depois dessa minha denúncia, infelizmente, por causa das políticas públicas, não tínhamos para onde ir. Então, um abrigo que era para colocar a gente não havia e voltamos para casa. Ele nos encontrou porque ele não foi preso imediatamente. A medida protetiva só faz com que ele saia de casa, mas não impede que ele se aproxime, porque um papel não protege. Ele se aproximou, quebrou a medida protetiva e nos ameaçou, mandando retirar a queixa. Eu retirei. E depois disso a nossa vida continuou um inferno, porque depois que voltamos para casa, ele começou a seguir e a vigiar todos os nossos passos. E ele sempre acreditava que eu poderia denunciar novamente. Então os maus tratos e as torturas continuaram por mais e mais anos. E essas torturas não eram somente físicas, mas também psicológicas, a tal ponto que eu não conseguia pedir ajuda para ninguém, porque eu acreditava que ele iria descobrir. Até porque as coisas que aconteciam comigo eram coisas horríveis, realmente macabras. Então eu tinha medo das pessoas tentarem dar uma de heróis e heroínas e me ajudarem e acabar denunciando novamente, e essa denúncia não ter jeito, da mesma maneira que foi a primeira vez. Porque eu fui obrigada por ele através das torturas e das ameaças. Então foi bem complicado. Eu perdi a minha infância, perdi a minha adolescência, coisas comuns que garotas faziam, eu não poderia fazer. E depois que eu tive essa coragem de denunciar, eu encontrei pessoas a qual pude confiar totalmente, fazer essa denúncia. Então, quando eu tive essa coragem, dentro de mim veio um grito de socorro, um grito de libertação. E eu acionei primeiramente pelo Instagram o meu estado, porque eu queria que a justiça fosse feita mais rápido e que aqui no estado da Bahia todo mundo soubesse. Não foi minha intenção ter essa proporção tão grande nacionalmente. Pensar nas mulheres que trabalham nos interiores, no agreste brasileiro, que estão lá, que não tem água nem energia para ter uma condição digna de vida, que tem que criar todos os seus filhos sem condição alguma, que vão para as lavouras e lá não tem políticas públicas para ajudá-las. Se aqui eu, com grande influência, porque eu sou estudante de direito, eu tive a ajuda de juízes e advogados ao meu lado, foi tão difícil, imagina nesses locais que não têm acesso a nada, nem tampouco à justiça. Então, o feminismo é um movimento que ele tem que buscar essa minoria, buscar todas as mulheres como iguais, mesmo aquelas que não têm acesso à política e à cultura. Nós temos que engajá-las e, acima de tudo, ajudá-las da melhor maneira, sem pré-julgamento, sem nada disso. Então, que venhamos acionar, não somente o Brasil, mas o mundo, de que é possível uma libertação e que não precisamos pensar como machistas ou feministas, mas como humanistas, porque existem almas gritando por socorro e é mais comum do que imaginamos. E são inúmeras pessoas que vêm até mim, que eu conheço e que aparentemente têm uma vida normal, mas que já passaram por aquilo, ou pior, ainda passam. Então, precisava sim de uma pessoa para dar a cara para bater, para expor todas as suas vergonhas, porque eu expus as minhas vergonhas e ainda recebo críticas. Principalmente na minha cidade, as pessoas criticam-me, principalmente mulheres, porque elas não acreditam que pode acontecer algo tão tenebroso. Então aí paramos para investigar o coração das pessoas, né? Porque o coração ninguém conhece. Mas se eu estou contando essa história, tenho provas e testemunhas, ninguém tem que ficar duvidando. Essa é a minha verdade, essa é a minha vida. Uma tem que segurar a mão da outra e lutar por uma igualdade. Não somente igualdade nos motivos pequenos, mas principalmente nos motivos grandiosos. E é por isso que eu estou nessa luta, agora militando como ativista, em busca de outras garotas para poder ajudá-la, e em busca de outras mulheres para que elas se fortaleçam em todas as maneiras, mas principalmente na liberdade sexual e liberdade física, porque ninguém é obrigada a ser torturada, ninguém é obrigada a ser capacho, ser usado por alguém, ninguém é dono de ninguém. Então vamos nos ajudar, vamos realmente usar nossos estudos, porque o estudo me salvou. O direito me salvou. Eu entrei na faculdade porque eu acreditava que um dia o direito iria me salvar. Não dessa forma, mas eu acreditava. E através da faculdade eu comecei a estagiar no tribunal e encontrei anjos para me resgatar. E a minha fé em Deus, o Deus Supremo, Criador do céu e da terra, independente de religião, Ele é o Deus acima de tudo. Então nós devemos sempre agradecer a Deus por todas as bênçãos concedidas e lutar umas pelas outras e colocar um foco, um objetivo. Estude, se dedique, você é livre, você é inteligente, não dependa de nada e de ninguém para voar, apenas de si mesmo, da sua fé e do seu companheirismo. Deixe o egoísmo de lado, seja graciosa, se une com as outras garotas e nós vamos vencer. Lute como uma garota, somos todas Eva. Obrigada.
Toda história de violência, abuso, assédio, dói em cada um de nós.
Não podemos permitir que mulheres vítimas de violência fiquem desamparadas.
É avaliando uma a outra que a gente vai mostrar que o Estado não está fazendo o seu papel.
E reforçar uma mensagem clara.
Mexeu com uma, mexeu com todas.
Please turn on the lights. So, what's the role of civil society organizations in promoting women's rights, fostering gender equality, and combating violence? Civil society organizations are of paramount importance in this matter, especially when we consider that they are the ones that work closest to the community, which allows them to have a greater understanding of their issues, as well as an integrated response to complex and structural social problems like gender inequality. According to academic studies and experience of social movements, the gender issues have a character of great complexity. Because of this complexity, a wide range of sectors of society must be involved, as well as justice, social assistance, socio-economic scope, education, social organizations, among others. Alongside civil society organizations throughout Brazil, citizens are also acting as agents of change in their communities, working together to ensure their voices are heard and their needs are met. Every day, individuals and communities across Brazil are stepping up, and by the Institute of Applied Economy Research, an institution linked to the federal government, Brazil has 800,000 existing NGOs. NGOs grow exponentially, as do the country's social problems. NGO reflects population aspirations. They present solutions, use tools of social pressure to modify public policies, and to show that the state is clearly not doing its part. For example, there are Our Cities Network, a group of 9 cities made up for more than 700,000 supporters all over Brazil that are already engaged through online and offline action, mobilizing for infrastructural justice, social inclusion, and care in their locus. They have already changed over 120 public policies throughout the country to date, such as femicide prevention in Pernambuco, Rio Grande do Sul, and Paraíba, and have achieved wins like the 24-hour specialized women policy station in São Paulo. One of the roles of NGOs, in addition to social assistance, is to become centers of innovation and creativity, bringing together suggestions for solve complex problems and testing those hypotheses. Unlike governments, NGOs are less bureaucratic and more flexible. Unlike private companies, they are less afraid of financial risks and are more likely to experiment as well as deeply believe in their work. In addition, they have more youth in their teams, which allows for an easier dialogue with innovation and the spirit of change. Another role of organized civil society is to bring institutions closer to teaching, research, and technological innovation in the real world. Universities tend to distance themselves from reality and isolate themselves in a self-centered way, thus contributing less than they could because of their higher level of academic and technical qualification. It's vital that research, people management, media, and academia become partners of the civil society to make effective changes in Brazil. NGOs that remain independent of public financial resources are more likely to denounce problems and bother decision makers, both in government and in business. Increased NGO concerns make them reach for women's leaders. Of the various organizations associated with the group of institutes, foundations, and companies, 51% have women in leadership positions in the third sector. This is what indicates research done by the group of foundations and enterprise institutes. That is, while the reality of private institutions is of low representativeness in positions of power, in the third sector, the majority are women. Women who make happen in causes that make their eyes shine. The causes for insertion in the third sector are manifold. Religiosity, considering that many NGOs are linked to religious entities of the most diverse. Sad personal stories that lead them to struggle so that then do not happen again with other people, like Eva. Inspiration in realities of other countries, use of technologies for social benefit and control, and a deep desire for change. The third sector is important and has grown in Brazil, but civil society has organized itself with the democratization of technologies more organically through various movements, not necessarily structured in organizations. These are the cases of the Marchas das Vadias or the Papo Reto, a collective of independent communication composed of young residents of the complexes do Alemão and Penha. Its focus is to spread news within the favelas, events, protests, claims, and also acts as a channel that shows the favela reality, having a strong role in the guerrilla media in times of war. The role of the state is huge, but more than that is necessary in historical processes. Civil and social engagement are extremely necessary in bringing out profound changes in the structure of society. The feminist movements, for example, assumed violence against women as a fighting flag. So it created the basic conditions for women to denounce violence while sensitizing the state to cease to be conniving with patriarchal ideals and to welcome these women. Although it's a slow process, because it involves a whole transformation in the social imaginary, without this political and historical effort, it would be not possible to guarantee and promote women's rights in Brazil.
Finally, we would like to pay tribute to Marielle Franco, a city councilor that, as stated in the beginning of this presentation, was brutally killed on 14th March 2018, almost 1 year ago, her political term, and her own life, both dedicated to the defense of women and human rights, were mercilessly taken away from her. Marielle used to say, "I am because we are." By adopting that speech as a slogan in her political campaign, Marielle intended to be the voice of a marginalized crowd, a mass of people consisting of mainly black individuals who live in the so-called favelas. She aimed to give voice and power to movements that fight for a better world, a world where discredited minorities would have more rights and dignity. Marielle was killed, but why, and why her? We ask ourselves. Her figure was distinguished by the reunion of a group of oppression markers. She was black, bisexual, favelada, and a politician from the left wing. With that in mind, it is possible to infer that some bodies are more vulnerable than others. Some lives are more precarious, as affirmed by the philosopher Judith Butler. Accordingly, the murder of Marielle Franco clearly shows the gender, race, and class inequalities that mark the Brazilian society so profoundly. Marielle was strong and brave enough to dare facing an environment that wasn't idealized to represent the group of people that, during her whole political life, she aimed to represent. Marielle was a voice to each one of those 45,000 people who believed that, with her help, the reality of violence, poverty, racism, and homophobia faced by thousands of individuals on a daily basis would finally be seriously approached by the legislative power of Rio de Janeiro, compared to the reality of a combat scene marked by brutal violence and death. Unfortunately, Marielle is now part of the terrifying black genocide statistics of Brazil. The coward political crime that took her life away also stole the democratic right of all of those people who used to feel politically represented by Marielle's leadership. The Brazilian political scenario, as we can see, is still very conservative and hostile towards women. Nowadays, only 10% of the political positions are occupied by female figures. Nonetheless, the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff, the first female president of Brazil, is in a distant memory. However, we cannot forget the great enthusiasm left to us by Marielle.